So again, in the participants list, find your name, hover over it, and then click on the More option, and then rename yourself to include your affiliation. And then the second thing I would invite you to do is to go to the chat room, click on the chat, and then just type a message to introduce yourself to everyone there in the group. So a little bit faster than trying to go around with everybody that's logged in and do introductions here. So ask you to do that. So drought is an important hazard here in Kentucky. I've worked various times over the years with hazard mitigation planning at the community level. And while tornadoes and floods and such tend to get a lot more attention than drought when we think about hazards, drought has a very rightful place as a significant hazard here in the state, in part because it's a recurrent hazard that visits us periodically. If we have even a short-term memory, we can think back to episodes of drought that have affected the state. And secondly, as bad as tornadoes, floods, and other hazards are, and certainly we witnessed, the devastation of flooding here in the state earlier this year. Nonetheless, most people are not directly affected by a tornado or a flood in their lifetime, but the entire state is impacted by drought periodically. So it's a hazard that has impacts on our economy, on our communities across the state, and it's worth our attention as such. This is an opportunity also for us to be proactive in terms of looking at drought. There's a sort of a joke in the drought community that we tend to not talk about drought until we're in the middle of one, and then when we're in the midst of it, we say, "Gee, we should have been prepared for this." And then after the drought's over and we have time to prepare for it, instead we kind of forget about it and go on to other things that are more urgent per se. So here's an opportunity for us, so while we are not in the midst of a drought here in the state, for us to be addressing the issue, and so I think that's a positive thing. And it's also important because there have been a lot of advances that have been made over the last several years in terms of drought monitoring and early warning. So when I started as state climatologist in 2000, we were in the midst of a drought that had started in 1999 and persisted through the year 2000, in some areas even into the spring of the next year. And so I got an introduction by fire, so to speak. But at that time, we struggled in terms of drought monitoring because the statistics, the data that we had to work with were averaged over climate divisions, and Kentucky has 4 of them. So we were looking at very broad, coarse resolution of information, and that information was not updated on a daily basis. There were certain components that were updated weekly and other components that were updated monthly. And so it was difficult to be able to focus in on the level of geographic detail you needed, and also difficult to be able to acquire data in a timely manner in which it was needed. And we've made a lot of headway in that sense over the years. So there's been the development of the National Integrated Drought Information System, the Midwest Drought Early Warning System that we are affiliated with. There have been a number of new drought monitoring products that have been developed, many using remote sensing techniques, and otherwise using gridded data and soil moisture and so forth. And there's just been a significant investment of time and energy and dollars to improve our monitoring capabilities. So we take a look at that, and again, it provides a basis for us to revisit drought and to look at some of the advances that have been made here in Kentucky, as well as nationally, national products that we can benefit from. Also, we're looking at a changing climate, and as we look at climate change projections and look at the trends and so forth that we've seen here in Kentucky, there is the expectation that drought will continue to be an issue that we have to deal with here in Kentucky. And in many ways, while we're not like the Western U.S. or the Southwest, where droughts can develop, intensify, and last for years, if not a decade or more, our droughts tend to be much shorter. But nonetheless, in a changing climate, we have the expectation that they could become more intense and develop more quickly than in the past. So the ability to monitor rapidly changing conditions becomes very important. So with that kind of introduction and overview of why we're here, we would like to go ahead and get started here. We have the agenda broken up here this morning, where we go for the first hour with some presentations relating to new tools, technologies that have been developed here in Kentucky to help us with drought monitoring. And then we'll take a break on the hour for just a few minutes and come back and take a look at drought from a different perspective in terms of some overview studies and analysis of drought and risk and such here in the state. So with that, in an effort to not get behind time right off, I'll turn over to our first presenter, Pete Chenote, from the USGS Water Science Center there in Louisville, Kentucky. And Pete's going to talk to us about and demonstrate a drought dashboard product that USGS has developed.
All right, well, good morning, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and attempt to share my screen, and we will see what we can do here. So you have to let me know if you see that drought monitor.
Yes.
Looks good.
Right. Cool, it's working. All right, first battle down. Okay, so when you open it up, this is the landing page. This is what you see. I shared the link to this in the chat, so y'all can take a look for yourself. But it's pretty simple, so this really won't take a long time, but it opens up on the information page. You see some tabs up at the top and some buttons over here on the left. If you go, you'll see a map of Kentucky with these little dots on it. Well, each of those dots basically is an indication of drought, basically. So we have the upper left is the 90-day precipitation percent of normal departure. That data is from the Weather Service. The 28-day stream flow percentile is the top right. That's from USGS. The 30-day groundwater level percentile is the lower right-hand corner. That's also from USGS. If there's other data, again, we can add data to this. So I know KGS is working on the groundwater observational network. If that comes online, we could add those in there. Right now, groundwater is limited in Kentucky. There's only 4 wells monitoring each of the climate subdivisions. So a lot of the counties don't have groundwater data in them, only 4 do. Then in the lower left, we have the 7-day crop moisture index. That is from the Central Region Climate Prediction Center. The methods, these color codes you see on here, these are all tied into Bill's Kentucky Drought Mitigation and Response Plan from 2008. So you look at these numbers, you have normal, advisory, moderate, severe, and extreme, and this ties into the colors, and we'll see those when you look at the legend. So this is all, these colors are actually linked to the state mitigation plan. I will say too, before I get too far into this, this was funded in part through, basically split this with the Governor's Office of Ag Policy. So USGS and GOAP went in on this. The intent of this was really to complement the stuff coming out of Western Kentucky and the Climate Center, and not to really compete with that or duplicate it. So some of these things, you'll see in here, we've tried really to you allow this to basically add in and really just elevate the state rather than just, the repetition of what, Stu and his group are producing. So we worked on this, carefully to try to avoid those kind of conflicts. And it's really set up to, as well, to be like almost like an air defense system. You've got a long range component to this, as well as a close up, close in range. So the groundwater, surface water, that's really the close range stuff, but I'll show you in a minute kind of some of the long range tools we've got here to help out. Again, as I said, as you're going down this tab, it really explains what everything does, crop moisture index, it links to it, and so forth. And here's the drought status for the colors: normal, advisory, moderate drought, severe drought, extreme drought, and no data. Again, this ties back to Kentucky. And then it tells you what each of the buttons do. So if you're confused, you want to know what something does, just scroll down and it tells you what everything does. So as you go up here, we can run queries on this. And actually, I should probably clear that. Let's see. But here, if you're going to, I'm trying to clear this. Okay. So yeah, so the query criteria, if there's different, right now everything's really wet, so it's all green, but we have one groundwater well, it's actually below normal, it's not coming back up. So if we do a query, we can say, okay, I want to, zoom to the extreme ones, and it will hit apply and it will zoom me into this county, and then I have to zoom back out. And so that's all that does. Is if there's different, you can say, show me all the counties that are extreme, all the counties that are green, or whatever I want to look at. And that's all that does. And just because I'm not going to stress my internet, I'm not going to hit this. Look there. The legend, it just tells you what's on the screen, and explains everything that's there, the colors and things for precipitation. And if I want to add data, and I'll tell you how to add data in a moment here, but if we want to say, I want to take a look at the various stream gauges in the state, you can see it pops up on the legend. Or if I want to look at the wells, it shows me where my wells are on there. So the legend just is pretty self-explanatory. It does what it says. We can also change the background map if we want to get fancy. Base map, again, a lot of GIS capabilities in here. If I want to look at the street maps, I can pull up the street maps and zoom in. If I want to look at, say, the hydro train or something like that, I can change that up as well too. So you can change your base map to look at some of the background information to put it in context a little bit better. If you zoom in, so let's go in, let's look at Fayette County. If I click on one of these boxes, again, it brings up the data for that box. I can click on this and it will bring me to my precipitation data. So all these are all clickable. If I want to click on stream flow, I can click on my stream flow. And again, it puts into context. These are, when you go to this goes to Water Watch. These are percentiles. So it tells you relatively, these aren't really the color you see on the plot. The colors on the plot are based on the Kentucky Drought Mitigation Plan. These are based on percentiles. So you can see we're in the green. We're pretty much where stream flow normally is at this time of year. Let me close, let's get this out of the way. Groundwater, kind of the same thing. Groundwater is high. We've had a lot of rain. One of the other observation wells is actually really low for some reason. We'll have to look into why that is. And then the crop moisture index, you can click on this and look at your crop moisture index. So yeah, it's all clickable. It takes you your data and it gives you a little summary above it too. What it means. What it's normal, what the changes weekly, what the the values are. So it's pretty cool to click around on it. If these buttons over here really add a lot of cool functionality that come out of GIS. So if we want to add data, and this is kind of where the long range component comes in. So this was kind of the close range radar, but long range, you'll see down here in the bottom, there's some standard things, and my participant list is in the way, but this vegetation drought response index, this is a model that comes out of Eros in South Dakota, and it's run MODIS reflectance data. It looks at soil moisture. It looks at a whole bunch of different things. And what this does is this looks at national drought. So we can back this up to a national layer, and we can see out west, we can see droughts starting to build in the west. So as these droughts build and start moving into the region, this is kind of the long range. This says, okay, well, I better start paying more attention to my local indicators as we go through it. A lot of it, you can see we're wetter than normal here. And if you look at the legend, it will tell you what that is too. So extreme drought, severe drought, you know, so you can see unusually moist. It's pretty wet back here. And then the drought's building. So anything you click here, it will open up in the legend as well too, if you want to see what it means. You can add a whole bunch of different things. Again, you can look at stream gauges that we used in it. And you can click on these layers, add different layers. Well, let's see. So I guess I'll go to the next one here. You can also select county and climate divisions. You know, say I want to select Fayette. I selected Fayette earlier, so there's Fayette highlights, tells you where Fayette County is at. So I can get rid of Fayette. No, I'll just do it later. But yeah, this is it. Just you can select the counties and the climate subdivisions on that. The coolest thing on this really is as adding data. So this opens up anything that's in ArcGIS. So some of it is if you go through, if you look outside, you can load everything from COVID, you know, whatever, anything that's out there in the world for ArcGIS, you can pretty much dump on this map. There's some pretty cool things like urban heat island effects and stuff are pretty neat. You can go through and put on there. But you just, you know, click on it, hit add and, you know, remove, and it tells you details about it. Like there's topobathymetry, there's the soils group, and some of this stuff we've got preloaded. It's like soils are preloaded, the soil survey map, the vegetation drought response, those are preloaded. Other things you can add. So I added the urban heat island effect on there because it's kind of cool. When you see these storms rolling up through the river, we were in Nashville during that 9 inches of rain they had last weekend. And it was really cool watching this urban heat island effect really just split the storm. But see, there's urban heat right there. So there's your urban heat islands, and they'll affect your climate too. It's neat watching the storms come through there. And we can also go through, and let me see if I can move this this bar here. Okay, yeah, cool. I'll move that. So then you can put on top of the recent weather radar imagery. So there's really nothing happening here. So there's recent radar. So you see storms coming in. But it's cool watching these storms roll across cities, see the effect of cities on the storms. So there's a lot of different things you can add, as well as just the specific indicators, right? For the county, surface water, crop moisture, and precip, we can add all as well as too. Now, one of the other cool things we can do on this is, let me turn this off. Okay. And this is just kind of fun, but if you have a farm or something like that and you really want to, well, here, before I do that, here, let's click on this. This well is one, for some reason, we have to look into it, but you see, it should be, the water level should be higher in this well than they are right now. And honestly, I don't know why. I've got to look into that, but it is normally this time of year is about a foot or so higher than it is right now in that well. So we're going to look at that well and see, make sure there's no pumping influences or anything on that are undue influence on that. But yeah, this is showing that the water level is lower than normal. So that's why that cell right there is specifically red. But one of the cool things that you can do on this, and let's zoom into, I don't know, let's zoom into Shelby County, Raleigh. So let's turn off the drought indicators. You can, let's see, measure. Let's go through and, oh, hang on, I went too far, went too fast. Measure. So it'll process, because it's got a digital elevation model underneath it. So it'll show you, you know, your elevation profile. So you're interested on where things are going to run off on your farm or something like that. And that's just kind of an added benefit of, you know, using this partnership we have with Esri, or ESRI. And then of course you can print everything here. You can hit the home button, the default extent, which goes back to that, or you can click to my location and it'll zoom into where you're at. So we have programmers in Virginia that do a lot of the GIS programming for us. So this is where, that's why it says Virginia Water, USGS is our programmers for this type of application out of Virginia. But so, you know, it's cool. It's really pretty simple. It's intuitive. It's fun to click around on. And again, the whole thing about it is you've got, again, the intent was you've got this long range view of drought, you know, which is this veg dry, seeing these things build nationally. And then you can come in locally and drill down to your local indicators. And again, I'm going to go back to Fayette and say, okay, what is this, you know, what is this doing to me locally? And you can see it locally. And, then it kind of dials into, hopefully we'll complement some of the stuff that Stu and his group are working and help people make some informed decisions locally. But again, we also try to really tie this to the existing state mitigation or drought mitigation plan. So again, these numbers, these colors are all coded back to time to Bill Caldwell's work. So with that, I got a couple minutes, if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. I have one question for you. You mentioned the groundwater data from USGS that we don't have a lot of wells right now across Kentucky. So how is that data derived? Is that a remote sensing product that gives an estimate of that? Or?
No, we actually have real-time, basically pressure transducers in 4 real-time monitoring wells, and they're transmitted in real time up through the GOES network, satellite network, down into the system. So the provision is all this data pretty much has to be real time. Like the veg dry is updated frequently. That's a model result. But the surface water, the groundwater, all those things are coming in from real time stream gauges, real time data. So
okay.
Yeah, so we've got like discrete sampling. Like Louisville's got a ton of wells in it, but none of them are real time, so they can't really feed into this. But if Chuck and that group, if they are able to get some of their wells to real-time status, pushing it over, we can incorporate that data into this. But right now there's only 4 real-time wells in the whole state.
Okay. That gives some clarity there. So, and where will people be able to access this? Again, we can see the link there right now, and you mentioned it's developed there with your GIS group in Virginia, but is that the link, or is there another place they can access this right now? And I know that's going to change because we'll be putting this into some other web products here.
Yeah, so right now I put the link in the chat for this, but they can access it on our page. But I think the Water Management Working Group and the Farm Bureau folks, I talked to Steve a couple weeks ago, and I believe that is going to be now on the Water Management Working Group page. I thought it already was, but it wasn't. So we should be able to access it through that group as well too. And then if anybody else wants to share this or put that on theirs as well, they can. And again, this is kind of set up to complement other programs. So if you want to pull pieces of this in and stuff, feel free. This is all open access.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? People can comment to Pete in the chat there if they like.
There is one comment or a question in the chat. Shelley is asking, so does this map show where all of the wells are in Kentucky? I'm not sure if you just answered that.
Yeah, right there. If I click this and I'll turn off the drought indicators and the counties, you can see those 4 dots right there. Those are the 4 wells right now. So, Graves County, Fayette County, there's one down by Cumberland Gap, and then Elizabethtown, E-Town. Those are the 4 wells. There's 1 climate response well in every climate subdivision in the country. So these are the 4 in Kentucky that we operate for the climate subdivisions for the climate response network, the national network. And again, those are all real time and operated under USGS protocols. The other thing too is like if somebody wants something added to this, it's something we could do pretty easy. I mean, it's just GIS. So anything that is spatial data, we can pretty much dump into this. So that's something else we have too. But so you can either use this or we can add to this. It's pretty straightforward either way.
And then Shelley's got a question there about private well information and such. So Pete, you might want to take a look at the chat room box there and respond to some more of those
Absolutely.
as they come in. And thanks so much for the presentation, getting us off to on a good start here. We'll transition now to our second presentation, which is going to be provided by Megan Shargaratsky, and she is the manager of the Kentucky Mesonet, and will be giving an overview of the Kentucky Mesonet Drought Dashboard Explorer. So Megan.
I lost it where I could unmute myself. Hi, everybody. I'm Megan Shargaratsky, and I have the pleasure of showing you around our data dashboard. I know many of you use our Mesonet data so far in your activities, and our website currently does a really good job of providing some very base level maps that pretty much everyone can use. However, some of the people who make decisions or want to play with the data a little bit more didn't really have the ability to do it. So in partnership with NIDIS and in coordination with the Midwest Drought Early Warning System, we were able to put effort into developing a data dashboard. And so I put the link to the dashboard in the chat. It is a temporary link. It'll eventually be changed over to something like explorer.kymesonet.org, but for right now, it's at a temporary location. So this dashboard gives you the ability to create different graphs, put different images into a gridded format. So looking up here at the toolbar, we have create, save, undo, redo, standardize axes, which is if you have multiple graphs that you want displayed next to each other, you can standardize them so they're comparable. Export in case you have a certain set of graphs that you want to send to somebody else. Import if you're receiving those. Settings gives you the opportunity to change the background and a couple other things. And then there's also a tour. And the tour is a very basic step-by-step run through of all of the different things. So if you're loading this for the first time, it's very helpful to take that tour just to make sure you know everything that's available to you. It's relatively basic right now, but we do expect to create an advanced tour as well. This dashboard area here is where your graphs will populate. The taskbar over here is kind of a sandbox. You can kind of pick them up and throw them over there into the taskbar if you need to rearrange stuff. So with all that said, I'm going to go ahead and go to the create screen. Within the create screen, we have several options for you to make images, and the only one that is not functioning right now is the map. It is something that we're working on, but it's not fully functional yet. We do have data graphs. We have images from the Mesonet webcams that are at a select few stations. We have the US Drought Monitor that we have loaded into the dashboard, and then we have EDDI data. We also have the ability to where if you have an image that you think demonstrates something that you want to have on this dashboard with your graphs that you've made, you can upload an image. So let's go to create a graph. And for here, we have template, which has a set of predetermined variables. And I'll go into that in a minute. Quick mode is a very streamlined user interface, and then advanced mode gives you a little bit more options. So with the templates, we expect that this will expand greatly as more people are using it. Right now, we have what we expect will be the most useful for drought monitoring. We have precipitation summaries using accumulated precipitation and precipitation. Another thing to note is that this is all daily data right now. For drought monitoring, daily data is the most relevant. So that's what we've put the most focus on. In the future, we expect that there will be 5-minute data incorporated, but for right now, it's daily data. We have potential evapotranspiration summary, precipitation summary, water balance, multi-year precipitation summary, multi-year evapotranspiration summary. These are all the templates. It's already put together. If you pick one of these, you go through and you can pick the station. Since this is a single station, it only will let you pick one. We also have, for site selection, the ability to look at the map. And so if you aren't sure what the county name is, but you know where it is on the map, or if you want to get a neighbor for one of your stations that you're interested in, you can pick from the map. So this is a where you choose the date, and then we'll submit it. And here's the graph for precipitation summary. So this is a year-to-date accumulated precipitation. So you can see on the first day of the year, we had about 1/2 inch of rain. So it starts up pretty high, but then goes all the way up until yesterday. And you can see where that's the station that I selected, Pulaski County in Eastern Kentucky, is up to almost 17 inches for the year to date. So we also have in the background, in the background here, we have the daily sums of precipitation. So you can see this is where we had the excuse me, heavy precipitation in late January, and then this is the late February rain. We also have the ability to create a focus, and this focus allows you to narrow down where you look at the data. You can break it down by the variables. Down here at the bottom, you can see that it's bringing focus in the top graph based on what you select at the bottom. So it's really helpful whenever you're looking at very large data sets. One of the other options for the templates is plotting multiple years over the same period. So you can have several years back of this year-to-date graph, and it's really helpful for putting context of how dry or wet the year has been so far. If one important thing too with the use of this dashboard is make sure you do not hit the back button. It does not work. It goes back to whatever page you were before you entered the dashboard. So it's very important that if you want to minimize this, you go here in this little plus sign kind of icon. You do that. So here's what this looks like whenever you bring it to the dashboard. You can have pretty much an unlimited number. I don't think there's a max number of graphs that you can have. We're not able to resize them. We learned that if it's much smaller than this, it's too difficult to read. So as I mentioned before, you can drag stuff over to the taskbar, so you can kind of store it away as you're working on other things. But it's very easy to drag and drop on both accounts. So going over here, going back to let's do one in quick mode. We have the the United States Geological Survey data pulled into our database, or our dashboard. And so we have the opportunity to pick a station. I'm going to pick a station with a camera so I can show you something else too. And we'll do precipitation, and we'll compare another year. We'll do 2020. So we will use from March 1st to March 31st for Boone County and Northern Kentucky, and we'll do Boone County for the USGS data. Sometimes whenever you are doing a larger data set, and especially with the external data, it can take a minute or two for the graph to prepare. So, okay, so here it is. So here we have our, the blue lines here are the Kentucky Mesonet precipitation data, and the other lines in the background are the USGS stream gauge data. So it's really nice to be able to have the opportunity to plot things over top of each other. You'll notice that these two colors for the precipitation daily sum are kind of very similar. So what we're going to do is we're going to go over here to the edit button, and we are going to change one of these colors. There's a lot of built-in customization that you can do. We'll make it orange so that it's easy to tell apart. So now you can see that this that this data is going to be much easier to see. So at the bottom, there's the submit button, and we'll go back here. All right, so now you can see that the daily data for the Kentucky Mesonet is a lot easier to determine which was 2021 and which one was 2020. The nice thing about here is that, let's see. Well, there should be camera images there, but I guess not. So let's just take a look at the at the Mesonet camera images. We have cameras at over 20 stations. And so we have the ability to go back through and look at all of them. And it is incredibly helpful whenever you're, especially whenever you're monitoring drought. Most of our stations, webcams have a really good view shed of different vegetation that that does a really good job of demonstrating whether or not there's drought. So let's just pick one. And when you pick that, it should go to the dashboard. One thing that I'm going to try to get together real quick is a station that has an active camera and plotting some of the data. So give me just a second. So right here, I'm plotting just the average daily temperature for Fulton County and Western Kentucky. And the station has a camera. For some reason, the webcam images aren't working, but in the case that it was populating properly, you would see over here on this side, you would have the images of the data, or the images from the webcam at this data point. So instead of just relying on what the temperature was or how much the precip was, you're able to actually get that visual image right here. Oh, there, it's working now. I guess it had to load. Right now we have the default time, I think, at 0Z, so sometimes it is really dark. But like this one, for example, then you can click on it and explore what the vegetation looked like at that time. So again, as we exit out, everything is coming back to the dashboard. You can drag stuff over, you can move it around. You can put it in the taskbar. And like, as I mentioned too, we also have the ability to bring in the drought monitor, which is really handy whenever whenever drought is an active concern. So you can see here, it's pretty white in Kentucky right now. But if we go back to, I think, February 23rd, maybe the time before that, there was a tiny bit of yellow, of D0 in Kentucky in February. So if we bring this, then now this is also in your dashboard. So once you have all of your graphs put together, you have the ability to export it, and it saves it as a TXT file. And so then you're able to put all of that into an email or however, a USB drive or whatever. And you can pass it on to your colleagues and be like, hey, this set of graphs really explains what is going on right now. You really need to take a look at it. And they will be able to take that text file and import it into the website from their computer, and they'll be able to see the same thing that you just built. So going back to this real quick, I mentioned that we have the templates. If there, as you're exploring this, if there are any sets of variables that you find yourself looking at regularly, please let us know, because we are more than happy to create this template for easy generation. So with that, I am going to open it up for questions real quick. I know we're pretty close to the end of this time, but thank you.
Thanks, Megan. And I'll probably take some blame on the camera images because I had sent a note to our programmer yesterday to work on the default time setting or whatever. So that's probably the reason that didn't work as desired. But yeah, I'd like to open it up. If anyone has any questions, we intend to make this publicly available and provide you with a way of exploring Mesonet data and also USGS stream gauge data and such that can be brought in with it. And as Megan also mentioned, it's got a temporary website, web home right now, but that will be moved, and we'll publicize that once that gets officially published and such for people. But you're able to access it right now, I believe. Any questions for Megan? There's a thank you from Shelley. Well, if you have anything comes to mind, feel free to send Megan a note in the chat box. And again, we're very much interested in your feedback. So to stay on time here, it's 10:45 Eastern, and we're going to move on to Chip Zimmer with the Kentucky Division of Water, who's going to speak with us about drought and hydrologic impact reporter and drought website development for Kentucky. So Chip.
Good morning, everybody. I'm going to try to share my screen here real quick. Megan, can you? There we go. All right, so I'm going to talk about well, first I'm going to start out by talking about our impact reporter that we created. It was released last year, but as Stu said, when we're not in drought, we tend not to think about drought. So it really didn't, between that and the whole COVID thing, it really didn't get a lot of publicity last year. So just going to go over that again real quick. The whole purpose of it is for people around the state to be able to share impact reports with us for both drought and also flooding, especially agriculture related wet issues. Just so we can get a kind of a feel for what's going on around the state. Because when I'm monitoring droughts for the state, I can see what's going on in the Lexington, Frankfurt region, but it's really, you're just looking at a bird's eye view of all the indicators around the state, and not really getting to see what's going on the ground, place in Western Kentucky, Southern Kentucky, Eastern Kentucky. So it really helps to get a down to the ground feel of what's going on and seeing what the impacts are. So what this reporter does, it's meant to be able to do stuff on the fly, whether you're on your phone or on your desktop back at home, just to make quick observations. So you just go in, put in your name, who you are, and if you're on your phone, it actually will pinpoint where you are exactly. If you're on a laptop, sometimes you got to zoom in to where you're actually at. So here shows it on the map, but actually it is zoomed in to where I am right now. So that's cool. And then you go down, and really you only have one question to answer at the beginning, and it's how wet or dry it is. And what questions come after depends on what you answer here. So if I put that it's wet, I get the excessive precipitation impacts, and it just opens up. And this is just one question showing whether there is what kind of flooding or any type of excessive precipitation issues you're having. If I select how dry it is, whether it's severe, moderately, mildly dry, it comes up with the drought impact questions. So for the first, you get another set of questions, is what type of impact you're having. And depending on what you click, we'll open up another series of questions. So if I select crops and pasture, it then asks what type of crop do I have, answer the crop health question, and then just what impacts you're having. And that goes for all the different types of impacts. You get at least one or two questions to answer, and that's it. And you can enter as few or as many impacts as you want. So you can I can click a bunch of these and end up with a bunch of questions open. But I think it helps to be able to compact it down so you're only seeing the questions for the impacts you want actually reporting, instead of having to scroll through all these questions. And then the last question on here is you can download up to 5 pictures, and then just put in a comment saying what we're actually looking at, because like it says here, pictures worth 1,000 words. So you can, it really helps to be able to see, especially if somebody goes out every week. Here's what my field looks like this week. This is what my field looks like this week, and see the progression, just like Stu's webcams on the Mesonet stations, getting to see how things progress through a drought. So now I'm going to flip. Maybe I'm going to, the Zoom thing's blocking my tabs. Our new drought monitoring website. So this is something I just created, and it's basically an informative website. Basically, I'm trying to do it to make it show what exactly I'm seeing when I'm looking at drought conditions across the state. Basically, I'm trying to show what I'm seeing, so people can come to this website and see what's going on. So the first thing is, this is a graphic that I created. The North Carolina Climate Office actually produced this and was nice enough to share their template with me. And they put a lot of work into this, not just the graphics and stuff. They actually used the sensors to track eye movements of people. So to see where people's eyes went, and then put certain things in certain places, where people's eyes are going to track to help it be as informative as possible. So on the top left, you have just what conditions are going on, and it's updated weekly. So what's going on this week, and the map in the middle, and the map there in the middle is the drought monitor. It's all white because we have no drought right now. Then just some of the different indicators: streams, reservoirs, soils, precipitation, and there's a couple other. I can add in wildfires. I can add in agriculture. So it's just a little informative thing. And then just on the right, what's going on right now, and what are we expecting coming up in the next couple weeks. At the bottom, we have last week's map, which again is still white because still no drought. And so, just like I said, just a nice little informative sheet, and it's something that I can save every week. And then we also have a record of each info sheet from week after week. Next is the drought viewer map. The drought viewer is something that's been around for a few years, and I went in and I have revamped it. Right now, this is just stream flows, 7-day and 28-day stream flows, and these are a couple weeks old. I was going to update it last week, but since this is new and we had some problems updating last time, I figured I'd just leave them be old instead of trying to update it and then just having nothing for this presentation. So I'm going to add Mesonet stations on here as well. Stu's in the middle of updating their servers and putting stuff in the cloud. So once that's complete, I'll have access to that information as well. Each of the climate management areas, when we are in drought and we start issuing state drought declarations, those will change colors, as well as having water shortage watches and warnings. That will be posted on here as well. Everything's all green because, well, like I said, we're pretty wet right now, so we're in good shape. And just scrolling down, this explains all the different drought levels and what they mean. And finally, I showed you the impact reporter. Well, this is all the impacts that we get. This is tied to the story map that's tied to the drought impact reporter. So as we get impacts reported in, you can come here and look at everything, and it's broken down by impact type. And everything, you can actually play this and show impacts as they appear. We only have one that I added in recently, but you can hover over it and click on it, and it comes up with the information. Of course, it's going to be a pain and not show it all. There we go. And it just shows all the information that was submitted. And when you click on the basic or each little impact, instead of showing all these responses, it only shows the responses that are tied to that specific sector. So again, it's just a nice way to see what's going on impact-wise. You can even look at the pictures that are submitted on here. In the top right corner here, you can also click on the drought impact. You can, where it says drought impacts here, that will take you to the drought impact reporter. So then you can go and report your drought impacts. So it's a nice one-stop shopping here. And still adding to this, but have all the different drought indicators. So far I got the EDDI, which shows the evaporative demand index, just how much moisture is being sucked out of the ground, basically. So the higher or the warmer the colors, the more demand there is for water in the atmosphere. Also got soil moisture, and then connections to the Mesonet, to the crop reports, to the new USGS page that Pete just showed us. I need to add what Megan just showed us on here as well. And that is pretty much all that I have right here. So like I said, it's just a nice informative website for everybody to come look at and just disseminate information to everyone around the state. So I guess I'll open it up to questions now.
Thanks, Chip, for that overview of work. And again, you have been working on the drought impact reporter for quite some time, and I know you've coordinated closely with the National Drought Mitigation Center and our NIDIS contacts to make sure that what we're doing here in Kentucky kind of fits in pretty seamlessly with efforts elsewhere across the nation. And as you mentioned, in the period since you've developed this, we really haven't been dealing with drought situations, and again had the COVID circumstances that we're going through that kind of limited us in a little bit in terms of getting this disseminated. So with that, open it up for any questions or comments that people have, and would also suggest that you might want to give some thought here. We've got on the agenda here today. The last 20 minutes or so, basically a placeholder of some time there at the end for us to have some discussion. And so this is basically the folks that are on this webinar are basically the heart of the drought community here in the state. And so we have the opportunity to kind of steer how things are developed, the direction that things go and such. And you've had the chance to see some presentations here this morning on different technologies that are being developed. And we want to get feedback on that and see, how does all this kind of fit together going forward. So we've got some time for some questions now, and then a discussion a little bit later on. So I'll shut up and give folks an opportunity to ask a question or put something in the chat there for Chip.
I do see one question from Shelley about who is it geared for. It's really geared towards anyone. There are agricultural questions there, but there's public health questions, there's water supply questions, there's recreation questions. So I mean, any type of impact you can think of, I tried to put it in there. So it's really meant for farmers, for people living in the city, pretty much anybody, anywhere.
And as we were in a drought situation, as that evolved, realistically, the groups that would find that the most useful and be reporting impacts may change. May start out with largely agricultural impacts and then shift to other sectors as drought conditions intensify. Okay, anything else? Okay. Well, thank you, Chip. We're about right on schedule, and we're going to take a break. I'll take a stab at this, and I know we're not meeting in person, but I have some confidence that if you need to take a break and go to the restroom, if you get up, look over your shoulder and see the door, if you just go down the hall, you'll find the restroom. So take a break, and we'll come back here in about 5 minutes. Welcome back, everyone. Everybody had a chance to take a short break there. And I was just looking at the comments here and wanted to summarize a couple things. First of all, I had a comment there from Steve Coleman, and he pointed out something that really want to emphasize here, and that is that there's been a lot of work done, and it reflects a cooperative effort. I think just statewide after the 2012 drought, it was really, I don't want to say necessarily a wake-up call because again, those of us in the drought community have been working and addressing issues for years, but that drought hit us very intensely, hit us early in the growing season and such, and made us sit down and take a closer look at how we can do a better job going forward in addressing drought issues here in the state. And again, lots of technology being developed and such, but I would like to give a shout out to the Kentucky Farm Bureau Water Management Working Group and the Kentucky Agriculture Science and Monitoring Committee, and all the efforts that have been made there that we're seeing a little bit of that here today. Also, let you know that there'll be an email go out to everyone here after the meeting today, where we'll have the links to the various tools that you've seen presented here this morning. The reason we put them there at the beginning is we would like for you to take a little bit of time out of your schedule, and I know you've got busy schedules over the next week before we come back next Tuesday, and spend a little bit of time with those tools, get familiar with them, see how they work, and then you'll have an opportunity then, if you have some questions or comments next week, that we can address those. So with that, we'll move on to our second part of the program here this morning with a presentation with Bill Caldwell and Chip Zimmer from the Division of Water on drought and water supplies in Kentucky. So Bill and Chip, we'll send it on to you.
I guess I'm up again. Go ahead and share my screen. All right, so I'm going to be talking about drought and water supplies in Kentucky. So with where we are right now, in 2018, we did a drought risk assessment. And this is, Bill's going to talk more about that later, but this is just one map from it showing the drought vulnerability for the state. And you can see there's a lot of places that are low vulnerability. And there's some medium ones, but really there's very few high vulnerability, and they're mostly centered in southeastern Kentucky. There's a few small systems in west central Kentucky that are also high, but for the most part, it's low vulnerability throughout the state, especially in all the population centers. Northern Kentucky, Lexington, Louisville, Bowling Green, Owensboro all have low vulnerability. So that's a really good thing. So how we determine risk. The first thing was the source. And it's the most important thing. It's also the hardest thing to change. If, for cities and counties that are along the Ohio River, that are next to U.S. Army Corps lakes, they have access to great sources. For other places, say like Casey County, for example, they're located in the headwaters of 3 different major river systems. They really don't have a good source. They basically have to deal with use what they have available, which is a small lake. And that repeats itself all over the state, especially again in southeastern Kentucky, where you're in the headwaters with the mountains. There's just not good sources, and it's something that's difficult to overcome. But it's also the most important, because if you have a good source, you don't have, that kind of takes care of a lot of the issues. The second thing we looked at is interconnectivity, and it's the way to get around the source problem. And when we talk about interconnectivity, we're talking about being connected to other systems that are also low vulnerability. It doesn't help to be connected to a system that's also going to be having drought issues at the same time you are, and having a good connection. There's systems out there that have a 2-inch line connected to another system, and it can supply 50 people, and that really doesn't help things. But having a connection that can supply, it doesn't have to be the entire system, but a good chunk of it, so it takes pressure off the source. And especially for if you have a lake that has a finite amount of water in it, being able to preserve that source and only use a small amount of it while you're having another system supply a lot of your customers really can help a lot during a drought. The third is management. If you don't have a good source and you're out of water, it doesn't matter how much management you have and how good it is. If you're out of water, you're out of water. But it can help prolong how much that water lasts. We have systems that as soon as we hit D1 drought on the drought monitor, they're on the phone with us. They're instituting their water shortage response plans. They're connected. They're getting interconnections, opening up their interconnections, opening up their secondary sources. And those are the ones that stay on top of things, and it preserves their supply. On the flip side, we have systems that, and I wish I was kidding about this, call us up and say, hey, we ran out of water yesterday. There's not a lot that the division can do about that when they're already out of water. And it also means looking at the systems, or looking at your pumps and your equipment, making sure that your backup pumps and your interconnecting lines, that all that is working. And so when a drought does hit, that you can turn them on and it'll work. And it also means looking at your primary sources as well, because if your main pump goes out, it doesn't matter if you're in a drought or not, you run out of water, and that happens a lot as well, unfortunately. The next is leakage loss, and it kind of ties into management. If you have good management and you stay on top of finding your leaks, then you don't have this problem. But we have systems in the state that lose 50-60% of the water they produce every day. So again, especially if they're withdrawing from a lake or impoundment, we have a finite amount of water. If you have a lot of leakage, you're using twice as much water as you need to. So if you were to go in and fix those leaks, and all of a sudden, instead of losing 50% of your water, only losing 15% of your water, instead of maybe only having 120 days of water supply left during a drought, all of a sudden you might have 150 or 180 days. And that could, it's a lot of time. That could be the difference between running out of water or making it to the next big rainfall or the end of the drought. So it's an important thing. And finally is infrastructure. And that's kind of goes into a lot of the other portions of it. But for this part, we were specifically looking at systems that have a lot of small lines, 3 inches or less, that go out into the county. And when you get into a drought, or you get into a dry period where you have a high demand, those are the ones that are going to lose. They're going to lose pressure quickly. First. So if you have a system that has a lot of small lines, you're going to end up during a drought, during high demand, when supply is low, you're going to end up, those places are going to be the ones that run out of water first. So systems that have fewer 3 small lines, you're still gonna, it's not so much a drought thing, it's more of a supply thing. But we did include that into it. So now I'm going to go back and look at where we've come from. So this is a map of all the main water lines in the state, and each color represents a different system. I know it's kind of messy, but you can see there's a lot of different systems throughout the state right now. But these are only the systems that are actually withdrawing water. And you can see there's a lot of places where you went from a lot of systems to just 1 or 2. And that's throughout the past 20, 30 years, we've had a lot of consolidation and really systems kind of combining or purchasing water from one main system. And in most cases, it's one main system that has a good source, which is what's helped us get to this low vulnerability in a lot of regions. And just a few places to highlight. I'm going to talk about Logan and Todd counties here in a few minutes, but they're a big area that's had consolidation. It's white because they don't share their water lines with anybody. But they're a big consolidated area. You can see they serve all of Bullitt County, parts of Oldham County, and they're also working on supplying water to Nelson County, Hardin County, and really helping out, get rid of some of the vulnerabilities in those areas. Over Northern Kentucky's consolidated, and they're into Northern Grant County, and also they supply some water to Pendleton County as well. The Cave Run Lake area, you have Rattlesnake Ridge and Moorhead, who both supplying water to the smaller systems there. And lastly, Knott County, which that's a fairly new consolidated area. They're put in about 10 years ago on Carfork Creek. And since then, Hyman and Vinco has both gone to pulling water just from Knott County, which that took care of two systems that were very drought vulnerable, and also they also supply water to systems when they have shortages. I know Hazard and Wheelwright are two of those systems that have had problems in the past and can get water from Knott County. Again, and that's a really important area because you remember going back to that slide a couple slides ago, a lot of the high vulnerability areas are in Southeast Kentucky. So it's good that we have at least one good regional system there, and hopefully they can expand out some more and pick up some more systems that are vulnerable. So go back 40 years or so, 1974, we had over 2,000 public water systems in the state. Now we have 433, and really ones that are actually purchasing water, or not purchasing water, withdrawing water is closer to 250. So there's a lot less systems. And if you notice, a couple of the big drops happened after 1988 and 1999. Those were two big drought years. And so you had a lot of these little public water systems that lost, that had problems. They lost their supply and realized that, they can't really survive a drought. And it's best for them to connect to a larger system or a system with a better supply. And so that's how we've gone from 2,000 systems to down to 433. And this is just one example, is Pike County. They used 189 systems. Now, some of those systems were, if you look through there are schools, there are gas stations, restaurants, hotels. They all had their own little water system. But there were some other small public water systems that supplied cities or regions of the county. And since then, they have combined down to now we have 3. And again, if you went back to the drought risk map, you'd see that all of Pike County is low risk. So you have 3 systems, they're all pulling from good sources. And so when we get into a drought, Pike County is not one of those areas that we're going to have to worry about too much. Back 40 years ago, you would have had all these little places that, you had a lot of them that would have been very drought vulnerable in even a moderate drought. And that brings us to Logan Todd. They're an example of a recent consolidation made up of 12 different systems. A lot of them are pulling from springs, small reservoirs. And I believe it was 1999. Bill can correct me if I'm wrong. A lot of those systems had problems with that drought. And so they all got together, formed this commission, and put in a pipeline into Tennessee to connect with the Cumberland River. So they went from being very drought vulnerable to now being almost completely drought invulnerable. Cumberland River, especially that far downstream, is really never going to run out of water. So they put themselves in a really good situation. And again, it's a it just shows how consolidating and finding a good source can really improve drought vulnerability in a region like this. So in conclusion, like Stu said earlier, we're in a water-rich state. And so most places have plenty of water, but just how topography and how the watershed's set up, there are places that do have issues still because they just don't have good sources. And while consolidation and interconnection has really helped decrease the vulnerability of the state, there's still some work to be done. Even in 2008, 2016, short, really not that significant droughts, we had systems that had shortages or completely ran out of water. So there's still work to be done. We still have systems that need some help, but we're working on helping with these systems and trying to help them find new sources, help them interconnect, and just help them come up with drought management plans so that they can hopefully do better in the next drought. So I'll open it up to any questions.
Yeah, thanks, Chip. I think we've got time for a couple questions here from folks if they'd like to ask. And I'll make a quick comment that, again, I came on board as state climatologist in 2000 in the midst of that 99-2000 drought. And I'm just very impressed with the progress that you've documented over the years and looking at the vulnerability of our municipal water supplies. There's been a tremendous improvement there. But as you noted, still some way to go in some areas of the state. So questions or comments? Okay, hearing. Bill.
Okay, sorry, I couldn't hear anything.
Okay, I think I was talking and I was muted and didn't realize it there. So
Okay, let me see if I can find my thing here.
while you're looking at that, I'll repeat one of my comments, and that is just I'm impressed with the progress that's been made over the last 20 plus years here to reduce our the vulnerability of some of our small municipal water supplies while recognizing there's still some work to be done. But Bill, whenever you're ready.
Yeah, I'm trying to start my, well, Zoom's kind of blocking me here. Oh no.
Okay.
Oops. All right, I'm gonna have to stop sharing again. Hang on a second.
No problem. Take your time, and if need be, we can go with the view that you had there. But
Oh, can we? Okay. Let's see here.
I've encountered that same issue.
That worked. My start is covered up. Anyway, I wanted to briefly say that the
Okay,
data that was used.
hold on, Bill. Bill, you're the window that you're sharing is the Zoom window that says launch meeting instead of your presentation window.
I was afraid I was going to do this.
That's no problem. I've been in the same place. So.
Do you want me to share your presentation, Bill?
Yeah, that's why I sent it to you.
All right.
Dadgummit. Sorry, everybody.
No problem.
Yeah, can you make it full screen or?
Yeah, is that good? Okay.
like I've wasted a few minutes of my time. Will that work? Okay. I just wanted to attribute the data for the history of the planning efforts and the changes in numbers of water systems in Kentucky to Gary Larimore and the folks at Rural Water Association. That's where we got that data. And I see that I forgot to put an attribution at the bottom of the slide. So thank you, Rural Water, for that data, which only exists with rural water. I mean, we don't have really good information going back in time like that. I'm going to continue with the drought risk assessment that Chip kind of introduced. Go ahead, Megan. One of the problems that we faced when we were asked by FEMA to do this was that previous attempts were largely unsatisfactory. And in other states, risk assessments for drought were largely unsatisfactory, primarily because drought's such a large area covered. Sometimes the drought affects a state pretty much equally from border to border. And so at the end of the day, so the conclusion was, well, droughts affected large areas in whatever state, and ag and water supplies were the most vulnerable. And here's a map of them. Bingo, that was it. So we wanted to come up with a way to, use data to develop kind of a more data-driven risk assessment. To do that, you need a drought proxy, and we chose a PDSI because you need a long record. And you also need a way to create a quantifiable hazard. And so, a drought develops from the interaction between land, surface, and the climate extreme that you're dealing with. So the measure of risk then is going to determine how that interaction develops over time. And finally, to have a risk, you have to, in terms of impacts, you've got to either have something you can quantify with dollars or other metrics in order to have a drought risk analysis. So I'm going to speak very briefly now about what we did in terms of analyzing the drought and then developing the public water system risk that Chip showed of the map, and then finally the agricultural drought risk assessment, which was, in my mind, a really unique, creative way to go about it. Okay, thank you. Next. All right. Most folks here probably know about what the Palmer Drought Severity Index is, so I won't spend a whole lot of time talking to you about that. But for purposes of this drought assessment, I used the Palmer Drought Severity Index going back to 1895 for each of the 4 climatic divisions. And following procedures that Rizal at Western used for a couple of papers that he published on drought in Kentucky and agriculture, I basically just went through and did a count of all those years. So any time the PDSDI fell below a -2, that began a possible drought episode. Three months in a row was called a moderate drought, and it was considered to persist until we returned to 0. So I basically just went through and counted all of these instances through the record for each of the climatic divisions. And Megan, show them what I came up with. Next. Oh, sorry. Yeah, okay, this will work. And so this is a huge table we're not going to go through. I just want to point out a couple of things. Can you see my cursor moving? Can anyone see my cursor? Okay.
Yes.
That's Megan's cursor, I guess, not mine.
What do you want me to hover over?
That's okay. If you look at this table, you've got the results for all 4 climatic divisions, and across the top, you're going to see the resulting droughts that came out of this. And most of you will recognize some or all of these over the years. Mainly in this table, just zero in on the columns. You have shaded columns and you have unshaded columns. The unshaded columns are what I'm going to call regional droughts, and they did not affect all 4 state climate divisions equally. The shaded regions with a statewide drought in which all 4 climate divisions experienced drought. And so basically what we have is all months, May through December and December through April, we've got a recharge time and a water consumption time to kind of break down the time of year that the droughts were occurring. And the magnitude of those decimal places, those numbers, kind of gives you an idea of the duration of time that the drought persisted. And then at the bottom, the PDSCIs down there kind of give you a measure of how extreme it was in terms of dryness. Okay, Megan. So we just took the 1930 and the 1950s droughts, and I want to just kind of show you a little bit about some of the information we came up with about droughts in Kentucky over the years. If we go down the 1930 to 31 drought, what you're going to see is values close to 1. And basically what that means is for all the months in that drought, some or all of those months were at severe to extreme drought levels. And the 30s and the 50s pretty much correspond to one another in terms of very severe and very uniform across the state. Now, if you click again, Megan, you're going to see the droughts that most of us now are more familiar with. You're going to see that duration and severity is less in the 80s and 90s droughts than what we experienced in the 30s through the 50s droughts. Furthermore, in that gap, you have the 60s and the 70s, in which we really didn't have much drought, incidents at all. And if Megan, if you click again, these are the ones that were the most recent. And I think what you can see is the duration and severity in the last 10 to 12 years has not been what we've seen either in the 80s and 90s or the 30s through the 50s. And Stuart alluded to this in the fact that they tend to be shorter duration, but much more intense. And if you look at 2012, at the far right, the only real area of the state that the Palmer picked up on was the Western Kentucky. And we all know that's where it was much, much worse than anywhere else. And also that, 100% of the May through November, which I call the water consumption season, 100% of that season was severe or extreme. The drought ended in the December through April, the recharge season. The Palmer Index suddenly was gone. So what this kind of indicates is we know that in climate division 1, 2, and 3, and 4, we had impacts from 2012. This is an indication of how the Palmer is not really a great short-term drought indicator. Okay, next. Now, some other things that we could pull out of this is to look at recurrence intervals of droughts. Let's just focus on the bottom row, that's statewide. Now, there were 28 droughts that reached the moderate level. That's the 28. The recurrence interval of about every 4 years, somewhere in one of the climate divisions or statewide, somewhere there's a moderate drought that is developing. The next column, 23, that's how many of those droughts went on to develop into severe or extreme. So of the 28 droughts, 23 of them developed on into severe or extreme, which is good to know in and of itself, with a recurrence interval of about 5 years. Now, the next column, regional droughts, about 12 of those droughts statewide were regional, which means that 1, 2, 3, but not 4, or any combination of less than 4 regions were in severe to extreme drought, with a recurrence interval of about 10 years, which kind of is how we, the 7Q10 is based upon severe and extreme drought. So that really does make sense. And then finally, the statewide droughts, there's been 11 since 1895. The Palmer would indicate, using the method we use, that there's been 11 statewide droughts with a recurrence interval of about 11 years. So looking at these recurrence intervals, these have lined up, I guess, to kind of verify what we've experienced in the past, but we've been able to use the Palmer to kind of tease out this information and quantify how often to expect droughts and how severe they've been over time. Okay, next. All right, now once we established this chronology, we looked at the crop insurance indemnities and used that as kind of a proxy for how drought was affecting us in terms of risk. And crop indemnities is basically crop insurance, and the cause of loss in crop insurance at the bottom you can see can be attributed to droughts or cold weather, wet weather, hail and other things, fire, biological, insects, or even drops in price or yield. And so what we did is we looked at all of the dollars that have been paid out through indemnities since 1989 in the state of Kentucky that were specifically attributed to drought. Next, Megan. And really what we find if we start at the top is that drought was indicated in 90% of the crop indemnity payments on about a 14-year recurrence interval. So as you go down that left column, say you go down to maybe where was drought attributed to 50% or more of the crop insurance payments, a recurrence interval of about 3 years. And then if you go on down to the bottom, based upon the crop insurance payout data, from 10 to 30% in any given year of your crop insurance is going to be attributed to drought or heat. About every other year of the occurrence of an interval of 1.5 to 2. So what we were kind of able to do with this is to start to put our fingers on, how often are we having droughts that are causing measurable monetary damage, which is a big interest of FEMA. How often do we have measurable large monetary damages related to droughts, and how often or how frequently might those occur? So we were able to tease that out as well. Next, Megan. All right, now really quickly, let's go into the drought hazard development methods that we use. This is where I think Chip and I really pounded out something that was a little bit unique, and I think it's pretty interesting. So go ahead, Megan. Chip already went through how we scored on the water supply side. It was basically a supply score and a distribution score. Hit it again, Megan. On the agricultural side, we based everything on soil because soil is the interface between the drought and how we experience drought. For example, in towns, when are people out watering their lawns? It's when they see the grass is getting dry and the ground's dusty. That drives people to use more water. Well, so soil is really a good thing to use in terms of taking a regional statewide phenomenon that occurs about the same rate, no matter where you are over a long term, and turning it into something that can be site specific. And so Chip and I got our heads together and came up with some rankings using soil survey data to look at infiltration, internal water movement, and water supply or water holding capacities of these soils to kind of rank them, and then to impose droughts upon them and see where our biggest agricultural risks might be. Next. Now, I can't show everything that leads up to this, and this is the water supply drought risk assessment final. Chip alluded to this already, the supply score and the distribution score. But suffice it to say that Eastern Kentucky, as we all know, this is where we found most of the water supply risk. I do want to make a note that the risk that we were using and the level of drought that we were using was probably considered moderate to severe. So moderate to severe droughts that cause issues in Eastern Kentucky really are looking at the water supply problems that Eastern Kentucky has. Larger systems, maybe a Kentucky American type system or some of the larger lakes that we have may not run into water supply drought problems in a moderate to severe drought, but they can run into what I call regulatory droughts, in which water withdrawal permits might make them start to have to cut back. So there's kind of a couple of different layers and nuances to, how big of a drought do we use? In this case, it was moderate to severe, and it does show that Eastern Kentucky is where most of that risk is. Next. Now, another thing that we can do is express risk as, affected population when it comes to water supply. So on the left, that's the percentage of population in counties that are under moderate to high hazard risk. And again, it really points exactly where we know the problems are, but this has been a way to quantify it. Next. And then total numbers of population in those water service areas. Again, when we look at numbers of people in the state of Kentucky that are living in water systems that have a high or moderate drought risk for public water supply, again, we're able to even more thoroughly zoom in on not only counties, but water service areas within counties. And again, Eastern Kentucky is where we know the investments need to be made. Next. Okay, then the next thing we did for agriculture is we looked at soils, like I said, and those factors for the infiltration, water movement, and water supply. And this map is a beautiful map. Chip did all these, hats off to him. The only problem is I'm colorblind as a bat, so I had to get my wife this morning to tell me what I'm looking at. And I know what I'm looking at, but I can't tell you what the colors are. But I'm going to assume that you're all seeing mostly yellows, greens, and blues with some reds. Now, the yellows and greens are low to moderately low hazard level for these soils based upon their ability to take in, redistribute, and supply water to actively growing plants. And you can see the different areas across the state. And of course, blues mostly correspond with rivers and riverine environments and lowlands. Next. Now, what Chip did is he took the National Land Cover data set, clipped out all of the crop acres, and laid those on top of that previous soil coverage. And now what you're looking at is the cropped land in Kentucky and the hazard level of the soils upon which those crops are grown. And it is my belief that you are seeing mostly blues, greens, and some yellows, which does make sense. You know, our forefathers and mothers knew where to plant the corn, soybeans, and tobacco, and the eastern part of, or the western half of Kentucky has about 75% of that crop ground. So that does kind of make sense in terms of the hazard level of these soils. You can, with his maps, you can zoom in on these things and even go down to almost the farm level and see what color those soils are that correspond to their water supply under drought conditions. Next. We did the same thing with pasture land. Primarily, you know, look, we're a huge cattle state, so we also looked at pasture land, hay, pasture, and grazing. And you can kind of see the cattle belt there running through the middle of the state. And I think what you're seeing is a lot of moderately high crop land or pasture land. And this is, again, in terms of the ability of the soils to withstand moderate levels of drought. And for example, if you go up to Scott County, when things get really dry, you know, a lot of times you'll see, you know, Scott County is one of the first things I notice when I just see the pastures really starting to burn up ahead of what I might see in Western Franklin County or someplace else that has some moderately low type soils. That goes back to, you know, that extra inch or maybe 2 inches of water that might be supplied by some of these less drought vulnerable soils. So in this way, we were kind of able to look county by county, state, farm by farm, basically, you know, where are the soils that typically are going to perform better under moderate drought conditions than others. Next. Yeah, the soil risk levels in the moderate to high hazard for crop soils are shown here on the left. And I think probably what you can see is where the crop soils are grown, the number of acres under high or moderately high hazard soils. You know, the number of acres is going to be higher where you have more soils. But you'll notice down in the Jackson Purchase area, you're going to see that's where you've got your most acres of moderate to high hazard soils. Primarily, you know, when you see the higher numbers here for soil hazards, we're looking at either the presence of frangipans or some other depth restricting feature that just basically limits the total amount of water that soil can supply during a moderate to severe drought. Fortunately, down there, they have access to the claiborne, you know, the aquifers down there. So there's a lot of irrigation that helps overcome those issues, as well as deep plowing. But for the most part, the soils in the corn and soybean growing parts of the state, the only real issues related to the hazard conditions of the soil, since they're all basically silt loams, it's going to be depth or depth restricting layers. Next. And this is the same thing with pasture, and you can see where the high hazard soils under drought conditions have shifted up into the central part of the state, for example, which is, you know, it goes right along with what we know when things start getting dry. This is the area that we start seeing the first problems with pastures and the early feeding of hay and all, when all other things being equal, the drought level is the same there versus, say, in counties further to the west. Next. Okay, last thing is beef cattle. We included beef cattle. We also did poultry and hogs and things like that. We didn't get around to goats and things, but I've got 3 goats out here in my little farm now, and I'm watching them, so maybe I can include them next time. This is an agricultural drought risk assessment for beef cattle. And on the left here, we have again the water service areas and our attempt to partition the number of beef cattle per county into each water service area. This is important because a lot of beef cattle operations might have to use city water, municipal water, water district water during moderate to severe droughts when ponds and things or springs begin to dry up, which tends to put a load on some water systems that they find objectionable. And sometimes even you hear rumblings of cutting off ag to save water and all of that. So this is one of the reasons that we did it this way. So you can see where the largest number of animals, beef cattle, appear to exist and in which water service areas that they exist in, the darker colors being the higher number of cattle per system. Next, Megan. Now, when we look at this one, we've laid number of cattle on top of the water supply risk assessment areas. And in doing so, then we can find where the highest number of cattle exist in the highest risk public water supply areas. And of course, these are the areas that you would largely want to focus mitigation funding, like the on-farm water management program, if we can use funding to take some of the pressure off of municipal water supplies by coming up with new ways for providing water to livestock that doesn't always include turning on the tap or running to the water hauling station. Okay, next. Finally, continuing in beef cattle, another way to use the data is, let's take the pasture and soil, or the pasture, hay, grazing soil hazard levels that we've seen before, where we can see varying degrees of soils that are better and less better for providing water to pastures. And let's say, well, that's going to give us an indication of when are we going to have to start feeding hay? Where are we more at risk of seeing maybe an early hay feeding season? And then Megan, if you hit the next one, if we line them up, and I haven't put one on top of the other, but we could, but then you can look at where are we at risk of having more issues possibly related to moderate severe droughts causing increased demands on municipal water supplies. So if you can just kind of in your mind fuse those two things together, you can kind of come up with some real, probably I would call them real hot spots for beef cattle production in terms of feed and water. And that's really where you'd want to kind of target anything you can target, whether it be BMP development, whether it be new water sources, or whatever else you can do. Those would be the places where you could say that's where we need to really focus our efforts on mitigating drought risk in beef cattle production. Next. I believe I'm about done here. The final end result of the drought risk assessment, number one, we realized that we had actually used a lot of data that hadn't been used before to do this. And and we also realized that this was the first cut. And we anticipate, we look forward to being able to do this again. But for example, up on the left-hand side, we just plotted that, I think this is for 2010. We have the agricultural, or the average corn yields in all the counties in ag regions 1 and 2. So that's going to be our two Western ag regions, including the Purchase and the lower Cumberland and lower Green trade water. And then on the x-axis, the percent of moderately high and high hazard soils in each of those counties. And so you can kind of see there's a pretty good relationship between our assessment of the soil's moisture capabilities and the average corn yields in each county. And one might say, well, what about irrigation? If you look at the amount of irrigation in the heavily irrigated Jackson Purchase, it's still a small percent, 3% maybe, of the actual amount of corn that's grown out there. So irrigation didn't have a huge impact on corn yield. So basically what we're looking at is soil characteristics underneath a drought hazard. and the impacts that those different soil characteristics had on average corn yields. And then finally, over on the lower right, again, the water supply drought risk assessment for public water supplies that we've come up with, the way we've done it so far, matches exactly what we have to deal with every time we have a severe, moderate, or extreme drought. So they do make sense. And so I think we have a foundation to build on. Okay, last slide, please. Okay, I want to reiterate this analysis was based on a moderate drought. And in doing so, we identified the most vulnerable water systems. I think it's pretty safe to say. The two types of water supply hazard I talked about, physical loss of supply is kind of what we got at with this one. But we don't want to forget about the regulatory loss of supply, because that regulatory requirements on water withdrawals are in place to protect other users, and that includes agricultural users, that includes industrial users, commercial users, and even non-permitted users or recreational users. So in our next go around, I think the regulatory loss of supply will have to be considered as well. Okay, next, Megan. Okay, next steps, just spitballing here for public water supply. We must consider extreme drought. The state drought plan was created. One of the things I told Pete Goodwin was we need to, what if we have a 1930 again? We're in big trouble. We need to do something about that. Unfortunately, the state drought plan at the end of the day didn't really address extreme drought and what would happen if we had a repeat of those kinds of droughts. We want to quantify source water assessments instead of more of the subjective assessment we use this time for the quality of the source. And so this will require some water resources work and using a lot of the USGS data that's available to us. We should probably include environmental risks in terms of public water supply, up to and including, HABs, places, hotbeds for HABs and things like that, and climate change. We need to consider these things under the auspices of climate change and plug in with some of the work and research that's being done by people like Tanya Williamson at USGS that are, really looking at, what does our water situation look like in the future, considering climate change and its impacts on precipitation, but also evapotranspiration and how those things interact. And then we should include urban soil and land use as factors in public water supply risk, because like I said before, in cities like Lexington, people aren't out watering their lawns unless they think they need it. What makes them think they need it? Well, it's a little hot and dry, and then the grass is crispy and it's dusty. And so that could have a big impact on the risk factors for municipal water supplies. Next. For agriculture, I think we need to refine our soil scoring methodology. We could, improve on that, and also incorporate mitigation actions. What impact these, if you impose mitigation actions on the risk assessment, how does that change your risk assessment? Irrigation, soil management, the BMPs that are related to, pasture maintenance and rotational grazing systems that help you maintain soil moisture at higher levels and have healthier pastures. Those can delay feeding of hay for 2, maybe 3 weeks at the end of the summer. So, those should be included as well. And finally, and we're working some on this, Chip and I, on some root zone modeling and things, but use this kind of methodology to develop tools for seasonal outlooks based on crop growth, soil moisture, and growing season climate models. So in this case, you would be using the tools that we've seen today, the evapotranspiration tools and the precipitation tools and all of that, to develop and use this kind of methodology of the soil being the interface between what we have to do and what the drought is imposing on us, and develop tools so that we can maybe in April, May, and June, we could have a little outlook into the near future and look at, scenarios where if the rain doesn't come for the next 30 days, what's that going to do to our soil profile, to our crop growth, to the stage of growth it's in, and to the remaining available soil moisture. So I think, using these methods, I think there's a whole lot of things we can do with them. They are going to take time, but, risk is all about how much do we stand to lose if we don't do anything or if we keep things the same. And I think we've probably made a good step in the direction trying to answer those questions. I believe that's all I have. I know it was fast, and I know I probably went over, but I do appreciate your all's patience. And if there's any questions, I'd be happy to take them now.
Thanks, Bill. Very informative presentation, and I must say I'm discouraged because initially I was excited about all the good work that's been done, and now you're saying there's a lot more to do.
Yeah, isn't that the nuts?
So, yeah, yes, questions, comments?
Go on, say it to my face. Here I am.
Hi, this is Rhiannon Simon with the Department for Public Health. I was wondering in your assessment if you all had ever considered using some health measures or anything to maybe complement some of this risk assessment. Some of your maps, the highest areas of vulnerability kind of also coincide with the highest vulnerability for health factors too. And I think that those compounding factors could be really important to your planning.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, in this first go around, we really wanted to do more of that. I ran into two problems. Number one is the availability of that data, and number two, really how to use that data in terms of, you know, we're looking at ER visits for breathing issues, you know. And Colleen was there for a while, and I talked to her a little bit about this at the first NIDIS meeting we went to. And but it's definitely on our minds. The only thing that we did use in the assessment, we did look at hospitals, the numbers of beds, the numbers of nursing homes, and then laid those down on top of the public water supply risk areas. So that's one thing that we did, but you know, that's kind of what everybody did. But it's really hard to come up with a really good proxy for public health impacts of drought. And for the next go around, since you asked that question, give me your email, because I'll be asking you to come up with the answer for that one, because we'd love to include that.
Excellent. I'm going to put my email in here and then also connect you with the rest of our team too, because I think that we would be really interested in participating in some of this.
It would make it a lot stronger. Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Rhiannon. And again, I think in the drought community, we're really moving more and more into the public health arena, and we're still trying to figure out how do we get there in terms of the products that we need. So this will be a great engagement going forward.
This is Randall Kelly with Kentucky Rural Water Association.
Hey, Randall.
Hey, yeah, I found this talk really interesting. It's we've used a lot of the same data in some of our training about, you know, the reduction in the number of utilities in the state, but simultaneously with the significant increase in the number of people served by public utilities over that same time frame. And it has, you know, significantly reduced the drought, at least the localized drought risk that, you know, a lot of folks were facing. But we still have utilities out there that I refer to as our canaries in the coal mine, so to speak. They're either on a river, you know, their water plants on a river that's just a bit too small for, you know, a good summer drought, and it's fine 99% of the time, but or their old lake that was built in the 40s or 50s for their water supply is, you know, again, just, you know, there's other problems with it, but just from a straight up having enough water, you know, usually most years not a problem, but yeah, you get a good drought in the summertime, and some of those are starting to they really start to you know, what's the word, not panic but almost panic, you know, they get we still have a problem utilities out there that are faced with drought issues, you know, in mostly due to the fact that their supplies aren't as big as, you know, aren't as substantial as they would like them to be, and then maybe they were back 50 years ago, but now as populations have grown or the water systems have grown anyways, now they struggle when the drought comes. So I really appreciate Mr. Caldwell's indication of that to others. In our world, this isn't really new to us, but it's nice to see it out there being, you know, information getting out to more and more people.
Yeah, thanks for the comments, Randall. And as you were speaking there, what resonated to me was the comment that Bill had made earlier, that a lot of this work was based on kind of a moderate drought and not a drought of historical proportions that we have seen back in the 1930s, 1950s. And in some ways, you know, that's a real concern, because we may tend to pat ourselves in the back and say, hey, we've made a lot of progress. but we haven't tested ourselves against one of those significant droughts. And you know, we can connect all the water systems we want in small areas, but if somewhere within that region there's not a good water supply in a very extreme drought, then we have a significant problem. So a lot of things still to be addressed.
Yep.
So, well, we've run into our 11 o'clock or noon hour, and it's been a great first day. I would encourage people to take some time over the next week to review some of the tools and information that's out there. It'd be an opportunity next week to have some feedback and discussion on things. And otherwise, we will look forward to another set of presentations next week to continue this discussion. Really pleased with the first day and with the interaction among the group here. And I think it's going to lead to some positive actions going forward. So thank you all. And if there are no other questions or comments, we'll wish everyone a good day and look forward to seeing you back next Tuesday.
Thank you, Stuart.
Thank you. Great presentations.
Thank you.